The St. Louis Zoo has more than 19,800 animals and 3 million visitors every year. Founded in 1910, the zoo is a natural outgrowth of the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair, which featured many exotic exhibitions and temporary zoological displays. In the centuries since then, the standards and expectations in the zoo world have dramatically changed, from a circus-like focus on entertainment to a more mindful focus on conservation and animal welfare. However, the ethics of zoos in general are often critiqued, since zoos often contain animals in small enclosures that deny them their freedom and natural instincts. Documentaries like Blackfish have also called into question the legitimacy of zoos' claims about their commitments to animal welfare, inviting us to take a deeper look. But sometimes we can be pleasantly surprised. The St. Louis Zoo, while far from perfect, is routinely ranked on lists of the most humane zoos in the U.S. and the world. Zoos have become entrenched and beloved institutions, and if managed ethically and conscientiously, they have tremendous power to do good. While I was visiting the St. Louis Zoo's chimpanzee exhibit with my family, my sister said, "Their eyes look so sad." But do they really look sad, or are we merely projecting our politicized ideas onto animals? Moreover, are zoo animals actually sad? In thinking about this question, I consulted Bob Sussman, a Washington University and St. Louis primatologist who's been studying primates in the wild for decades in close conjunction with the St. Louis Zoo.
Bob Sussman at Washington University Anthropology Department.
Professor Sussman believes that people's concerns about animal welfare are often justified because being kept in small cages is against these animals' natures.
The alternatives is that they're captured, they're put in small places, and many times they're not very happy and not very, they don't exist so well alone like that.
I expected Professor Sussman to expound upon this, perhaps even to condemn zoos as oppressive institutions. But to my surprise, he did not.
Well, I think it's against their nature, but in many cases these animals might have been killed anyway. So the captivity situations at the zoo are right now in the best situation that they've been in.
Okay.
They put them into habitats that are quite like their own and things like that as much as they can. It's really hard to say, but I think in many cases if you watch the animals for a long time, then the animals get into quite active situations, they're quite active most of the time. So I think in many cases they're pretty happy, and in many cases they don't have another alternative.
Yeah.
They don't know another alternative.
That's true. Susan Gallagher, Public Relations Director of the St. Louis Zoo, agrees.
I am Susan Gallagher and a Director of Public Relations at the St. Louis Zoo.
I was instantly reassured by Gallagher's obvious passion for the zoo and her commitment to its missions. She told me about all of the regulators that give the St. Louis Zoo its accreditations, checks and balances, if you will.
There are zoos and there are zoos.
Right.
And ours is an accredited zoo, as you probably know, which is a very high standard to meet. And we have a lot of regulators. We have the USDA regulating us, U.S. Fish and Wildlife regulating certain aspects, so many regulators.
Gallagher also communicated the zoo's commitment to knowing the animal's provenance. She explained to me where the animals come from, and it's almost never from the wild.
Many years ago, animals were taken from the wild. They are no longer taken from the wild unless they're orphaned. For example, we have an orphaned polar bear we think will come here. We haven't gotten the permit yet.
And that's the polar bear exhibit,
Right.
all the information you sent me with that, right?
And that is an animal from a wild environment that the mother was killed. It was a sustenance hunt, which means that it was legal, and yet the mother was killed, and the hunter did not know that the mother had a cub.
This challenges the criticism that zoos arbitrarily capture animals from the wild. Most of the time, the animals are actually born in captivity, and the rest of them are animals, like orphans, that would have almost certainly died in the wild. The zoo is an incredibly complex institution, and to reduce it to keeping animals in cages would be to do it a gross disservice. In fact, sometimes the zoo is the reason why that animal, or even that species, is still alive. What many people don't realize is that the zoo is an incredibly important research institution. It has 12 centers across the world and collaborates with 180 partner institutions, such as other zoos, universities, and animal rescue organizations. Most museums have a research component, but the St. Louis Zoo's research has especially potent consequences. Its efforts to protect habitats, increase reproductive health, and foster genetic diversity are life and death for these animals.
Everything scientists know about the medical needs of wild animals comes from zoos.
When possible, the St. Louis Zoo tries to reintroduce species back into the wild to augment wild populations of highly endangered species like lemurs.
We've had some success. We've actually reintroduced zoo animals back into their native habitat. With antelope species in Africa, with certainly reintroduction of, this is interesting, the Ozark hellbender. We've also introduced on the primate level lemurs into Madagascar.
Like any museum, the St. Louis Zoo has to balance many different interests, most significantly the balance between conservation and entertainment.
Media naturally are more interested oftentimes in the sea lion show.
Right.
First of all, it's visible. Much of our media now is a visible media.
Right.
So essentially, we try very hard to interest reporters in conservation issues and to explain those things, and through signage and through all kinds of blogging and social media, we try very hard to carry those messages. We are very keen on making people understand their role in conservation and giving them a connection to animals so that they will care more about animals in the wild.
Do you think that it takes that kind of contact, like face-to-face, so to speak, when people come in to make them care about these conservation issues? One of the aims of the signs posted around the St. Louis Zoo is to emphasize the idea that animals are just like us. It's a complex claim that zoo critics often struggle with. For example, if gorillas are just like us, then why are we looking at them behind glass enclosures? As Professor Sussman said,
Well, primates are just like us and compared to other animals.
Right.
But compared to being humans, they're not humans. So there's similarities to the statement, and there are also dissimilarities.
The point of these just like us signs, however, is to foster empathy between visitors and the animals.
And that certainly is our orientation, because we want people to watch sort of the grooming, the foraging for food, the playing, the parenting, other social interaction, and to understand and to see, the similarities. And again, it's an effort to inspire empathy, because primates are in big trouble.
The St. Louis Zoo strives to be a place where interspecies connections can be made that hopefully will inspire people to empathize with other creatures. When humans recognize elements of ourselves in other creatures, their suffering feels much more personal, and we care more about protecting their habitats and their livelihood. This is especially important because, in some ways, the zoo is a mausoleum. It cares for species that are extinct or almost extinct.
Half of all primate species are threatened with extinction as a result of human activity.
Right.
And that's a really scary number.
The zoo is proof that, while human activity can be enormously destructive, it doesn't have to be.
There's a lot of language, very scary language about climate change and the impact, and people feel completely frustrated and that they can do nothing. And we know that small actions make a difference. So we try to encourage that rather than do a lot of scaremongering.
Right.
On every sign, the conservation status of an animal. It's, endangered or threatened. But we don't beat people over the head with it, only because it makes them feel helpless in the face of this extraordinary situation.
The St. Louis Zoo is committed to justice. Justice for the earth, for the animals, and for the people whose livelihoods are interconnected with their environment. While the zoo is extremely committed to the zoo animals in its care and giving them the dignity that all living beings deserve, it is simultaneously committed to animals in the wild. The St. Louis Zoo's leadership in research, conservation, and animal medicine is one of the most promising hopes for wildlife survival.
Yeah, you're right.
And this is kind of like a bit of a downer question, but for some of the animals that it's unlikely that they will be able to be reintroduced into the wild, or that their populations will stabilize. Do you see like zoo work as being kind of like giving back some of the dignity that their species has been robbed of by habitat deprivation, etc.?
Absolutely. These animals are ambassadors of their kind. So they basically are the creatures who can carry the message about the need to conserve, the need to make sure that other species aren't driven to extinction by our behavior, our human behavior.